The year is 1763. Inside a besieged British fort, a terrifying decision is made. One that won't just kill with muskets or cannons, but with something far more insidious: disease. Blankets taken from the beds of smallpox victims are deliberately handed to Native American leaders as so-called gifts. Within weeks, villages begin to die, not from war wounds, but from one of the deadliest plagues in human history. Was this just a coincidence, or one of the earliest documented cases of biological warfare? Let's investigate the chilling evidence, the letters, the journals, and the devastating aftermath of what became known as the smallpox blankets. The British had just won the 7 Years' War in 1763, a global conflict that pitted them against the French for control of North America. The Treaty of Paris forced France to surrender vast territories, from Canada down to Mississippi. But while Britain celebrated, the indigenous peoples of the continent saw their lives and lands vanish. The Ohio Valley, home to the Delaware, Shawnee, Seneca, and many other tribes, was now under British control and British arrogance. French colonists had long maintained trade and diplomatic relations with native nations. The British, not so much. They restricted trade, treated tribal leaders with open contempt, and refused to give traditional gifts, which were critical in native diplomacy. Enter General Jeffrey Amherst, the British commander-in-chief in North America. He didn't just disrespect the indigenous diplomacy, he hated Native Americans. In his words, they were vermin to be extirpated. This is not paraphrased, this is written in his own hand. In response to British occupation and cruelty, an alliance of tribes rose up in what would become known as Pontiac's War, named after Pontiac, the brilliant Ottawa war chief. Pontiac united tribes from the Great Lakes, the Ohio Valley, and the Illinois County in a campaign to drive out the British. Starting in May 1763, native forces launched a wave of coordinated attacks on British forts and settlements. Fort Detroit, Fort Sandusky, Fort Miami, Fort Presque Isle, and Fort Machilimackinac. Over a dozen fell or were attacked in the span of weeks. These weren't just raids, they were military campaigns by indigenous nations who refused to be erased. The British were shocked. Their troops were overstretched, their forts isolated, and their supply lines cut off. One of the most threatened outposts was Fort Pitt, located at the confluence of the Allegheny and Monongahela rivers, what is today Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Inside Fort Pitt, surrounded by angry native warriors, British officers made a decision that would change history. On June 24, 1763, Captain Simeon Ecoye, commander of the fort, recorded in his journal a disturbing act.
We gave them 2 blankets and a handkerchief out of the smallpox hospital. I hope it will have the desired effect.
These items were given during supposed peace talks with Delaware tribal leaders. But what makes this event even more chilling is that it wasn't just the idea of one desperate captain. It was part of a conversation between the highest-ranking British officers in North America. On July 7, 1763, General Amherst wrote to Colonel Henry Bouquet, suggesting they infect Native Americans with smallpox.
Could it not be contrived to send the smallpox among those disaffected tribes?
Bouquet replied,
I will try to inoculate them with some blankets that may fall into their hands.
Amherst responded approvingly.
You will do well to try to inoculate them.
These letters still exist. They are real, and they are among the earliest written records of biological warfare, not just in North America, but in world history. Smallpox wasn't just any disease, it was a nightmare. Caused by the variola major virus, smallpox produced high fever, vomiting, and massive pus-filled sores that covered the body. Survivors were left with deep scars. Many went blind. And for those with no prior exposure, like Native Americans, the mortality rate could be up to 90%. To indigenous nations, smallpox was an invisible killer. Tribes like the Lenape, Mingo, and Shawnee were devastated. Oral histories speak of entire villages wiped out in days. It's impossible to track exactly how many deaths were caused by these infected blankets, but the timing of outbreaks and the statements from the British officers paint a damning picture. And Fort Pitt was not an isolated case. History is full of suspicious epidemics that follow colonial conflict. In 1520, smallpox was brought to Mexico, ravaging the Aztec Empire and paving the way for Spanish conquest. During the 1837 epidemic, a clerk aboard the steamboat St. Peter allegedly gave infected blankets to the Mandan people in modern-day North Dakota. Within months, 90% of the tribe had died. Even in the 1860s, during the Plains Wars, accusations surfaced that the US Army deliberately spread disease among the Sioux and Cheyenne. While some historians argue that smallpox was already present and spreading naturally in 1763, the written record from Amherst and Bouquet shows clear intent, and that matters. Intentional or not, the use of disease as a weapon had genocidal consequences. The story of the smallpox blankets is not just a historical footnote. For many native communities, it represents the first strike in a long campaign of genocide and dispossession. It shattered trust, it set a precedent, and it showed how easily colonial powers would resort to cruelty and deception to control a continent. Today, the smallpox blankets incident is taught in some history classes, but often downplayed, debated, or forgotten. Yet the letters remain, the deaths are real, and the trauma endures. Pontiac's war would eventually end in 1766, with the British making temporary concessions. But it was not a victory for Native Americans. It was the warning of horrors to come: forced removals, broken treaties, massacres, reservations, and assimilation policies. The biological war waged at Fort Pitt was only the beginning.